A millionaire made a cruel bet to marry an ugly black beggar just for the clicks, the claps and the cameras. The wedding was set, the world was watching, and the lie was dressed in white. But just before the final I do, Big Shaq walked in and stopped everything. What unfolded wasn't a ceremony, it was a reckoning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The penthouse perched above Manhattan's skyline wasn't built for comfort. It was built to impress. Vast glass panels stretched from floor to ceiling, trapping reflections of the city's glinting bones beneath them. Cold marble floors whispered beneath custom leather shoes, and dim lighting washed everything in the color of ash. Inside, the air hummed not with warmth, but calculation. Every surface sterile, every bottle aged and untouched until a photo op deemed it necessary. This wasn't a home, it was a stage. At the center of the marble maze stood Grant Remington, 39, absurdly fit, clean-shaven, like a GQ mannequin. His jawline sharper than most people's moral compasses. Grant wasn't old money, but he dressed like it, wore his arrogance like a second skin, and had the unnerving habit of turning kindness into spectacle. In the world of high finance and Silicon Valley conquest, he wasn't just successful, he was a predator with a LinkedIn profile. That evening, the penthouse pulsed with soft jazz and colder laughter. 6 men, all white, all fabulously wealthy, lounged around a glass table, cluttered with whiskey glasses, cigar trays, and the sheen of superiority. They weren't friends, they were a pack, each one trying to outwit the next, not with brilliance, but with brutality disguised as cleverness. Grant raised his glass, the amber catching the light like molten arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, already knowing the room would follow his lead. "You know," he drawled, as if the thought had just occurred to him. "The world's so obsessed with beauty. But what if we flipped it?" His voice curled with amusement. The room perked up, trained like bloodhounds. Grant's games weren't random. They were artfully cruel. "I'm thinking of doing something different. A little challenge. Let's say," he paused, savoring the moment. "I find the ugliest black woman on the streets of New York. Homeless, dirty, no filters, no angles, no second chances. I clean her up, give her a ring, walk her down the aisle in front of 500,000 followers. A full wedding, and I marry her. Just to show I can." There was a pause. A long, slow pause.
Then came the laughter.
Not polite laughter. Guttural, backslapping, hollow. It wasn't that the others were shocked, it was that they admired his shamelessness. Only one man, a silent hedge funder named Colin, seemed to hesitate, but he said nothing. Silence in that room was permission. Grant sipped his whiskey again, eyes gleaming. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for the art of the power move, for the brand. Imagine the clicks, the think pieces. Billionaire weds the unseen. It's controversy that gets currency, empathies for interns." No one challenged him, not because they agreed, but because challenging meant stepping outside the performance. And here everyone had a role to play. No script for dissent, so they toasted to his madness, and the room moved on like cruelty hadn't just been served. Downstairs the city pulsed, unaware. But somewhere between the laughter and the clinking glasses, the chill in the air deepened. Grant didn't come from this world, not originally. He clawed his way out of some Midwestern suburb where his father wore his disappointment like a necktie and his mother smoked through dinner. His childhood wasn't poor, but it was empty. He'd learned early, charm could be manufactured, and people were assets if you handled them right. He wasn't in love with wealth. He was in love with its uses, and right now he was about to wield it like a weapon. The next morning, the bet was in motion. Grant didn't send a team. This part had to be organic. Real. He wanted to be seen doing it himself. One phone call and a street photographer, paid under NDA, began shadowing him with a long lens. Grant strolled through Central Park, through Harlem, through forgotten corners of the city's veins, dressed in casual cashmere, playing the part of a billionaire with a heart. He scanned corners, soup lines, shelters. He wasn't looking for someone who looked broken. He wanted someone who looked like the world had forgotten her completely. She needed to shock, to provoke outrage, pity, discomfort. He needed her to contrast him like soot against silk. And then he saw her, sitting on a frayed wool blanket outside an abandoned bookstore on 14th. She was hunched over a piece of sidewalk chalk, drawing what looked like rivers of cursive poetry on the concrete. Her hair was matted, her face uneven, not because of deformity, but because life had pressed its weight unevenly on her. There was something haunting in her stillness. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't even look up.
Letitia Ward.
Grant smiled. Not out of kindness, but satisfaction. She would do. Back at the penthouse, the group chat buzzed. Grant sent a blurry photo from afar. A single caption, "Game on." Cheers rained in. Letitia didn't know the photo had been taken. When he approached her, he did so with the careful, calculated body language of someone who'd studied empathy like a business acquisition. His voice was gentle, his smile soft. He asked her name. He offered warm food. She hesitated, but took it, not because she was weak, but because she hadn't eaten in 2 days. He returned the next day. Then again. Over a week, he layered charm like lacquer over poison. He asked about her drawings. She told him, softly, that she used to teach once, back when life had a different texture. She never said why she ended up here. He didn't ask. That wasn't part of the plan. Instead, he told her she was special. That he believed in fate. That maybe, just maybe, he'd found something real in the chaos. Letitia didn't trust it. But after so many winters of being unseen, even a lie wrapped in warmth can feel like salvation. 1 week later, under a cathedral of chandeliers and calculated lighting, Grant announced the engagement on a live stream. Letitia stood beside him, bewildered, in second-hand pearls and a too-stiff smile. "We found each other in the most unexpected place," he said to the camera, squeezing her hand a little too tightly. "Sometimes love comes from the streets. Sometimes the most beautiful hearts wear the roughest armor." The chat exploded, love and hate mixed in equal measure. Some called him a hero, others called it a hoax. A few, the wise ones, just stared at Letitia's eyes and saw confusion swimming behind them. Grant signed with a smile. The wedding's in 4 weeks. The whole world's invited. Letitia said nothing. And far away, in a quiet Florida living room, Lucille O'Neill watched the video on her iPad. Her eyes narrowed. She reached for the remote. "Shaquille," she said, without looking up. "Come here. You need to see this." Letitia Ward moved through the city, like breath through a cracked window, unnoticed, but always present. At 38, she had learned the rhythms of Manhattan's neglect. Her home wasn't a place, but a sequence of corners. She slept near the old library on 14th Street, just beside the boarded-up bookstore, where the awning still fluttered like an old flag. She didn't beg. She didn't harass. She didn't cry on command. She simply existed, chalk in one hand, words spilling from her fingers into the concrete, like prayers no one read. Every morning before dawn, Letitia scribbled verses onto the sidewalk. No stanzas, no titles, just fragments of thought that hinted at a mind too brilliant to be where it was. She had once been an educator, a high school literature teacher in Newark. Her downfall wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scandal or a crime. It was slow, the kind of decline that doesn't make headlines: a sick mother, a layoff, an eviction, a bureaucratic mistake, a missed call. In 3 years, she went from guiding students through Baldwin and Angelou to crafting couplets on concrete for pigeons and passing sneakers. People passed her like she was graffiti, glanced, then erased her with their eyes. But she wasn't invisible by accident. The world made her that way. It was easier to ignore beauty when it wasn't convenient. She didn't see Grant Remington the first day he walked past her. That day, she was writing a piece about rusted time and broken clocks. He stood across the street in tailored gray, watching her through tinted lenses. She didn't lift her head. She didn't know she'd become the answer to a bet. The second day, he returned with coffee and a quiet smile. "You looked cold," he said. She eyed the cup warily. He didn't force it on her. He left it on the ledge and walked away. She drank it when he disappeared. The warmth hit harder than expected. So did the memory that someone had looked her in the eye. On the third day, he brought a blanket. She didn't thank him. She simply nodded. She hadn't trusted many people in a long time, not since the system taught her that empathy came with expiration dates. Grant didn't rush. That was his advantage. He courted her trust like an investor soft-selling a pitch. He asked about her poems. She told him she didn't write for people anymore. "Sidewalk's the only thing honest left," she muttered. "It doesn't pretend to care, but it listens." He chuckled. "That's beautiful. You're really something." Letitia narrowed her eyes. Compliments from strangers were currency she couldn't afford. You don't have to say that. I want to. And that was the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, their rhythm grew. He brought small things, a coat, then a thermos, then a battered paperback. Of their eyes were watching God. She refused the coat at first. He left it anyway. It rained 2 nights later, and she wore it. He never asked about her past, not directly. She offered bits. Her mother had passed in a state hospital. She once lived in a 3rd-floor walk-up with green tiles in the kitchen. She used to play piano badly. Her smile was quick but didn't stay long. Her laugh was low and rare. She didn't apologize for herself. What caught Grant's attention most wasn't her circumstance. It was her self-respect. She didn't grovel. She didn't perform for pity. She took what she was given, with grace, not gratitude. And in a way that annoyed him. He wanted her dependent, grateful, impressed. Instead, she was simply present, like she'd always known the world had no intention of saving her, and had learned to save herself in small ways. On the 15th day, Grant invited her to lunch. A real place. Linen napkins. Brass fixtures. She hesitated for a full minute. "You're not playing with me, are you?" she asked finally. He looked wounded. Of course not. She wore the coat, brushed her hair back with her fingers, and entered the restaurant like it was a museum. Silent, observing, trying not to breathe too deeply. The waitstaff stared. Grant ignored them. She barely touched her salad. He talked about life, about fate, about second chances. Letitia listened, unsure what she was supposed to say. Afterward, he asked if she wanted to shower, just to feel fresh again, he said, gently. He had a spare room. She said no. He didn't push. 2 days later, she said yes. The first night she stayed at his apartment. She slept on top of the covers, fully clothed, shoes on. She didn't trust silk pillows or lavender-scented sheets. She didn't trust the quiet. It was too clean, too empty, like a stage waiting for a cue. But the shower felt like resurrection. And the mirror, the one in the hallway, showed her a version of herself she'd almost forgotten. Not pretty, not polished, but human. She touched her face like it was an old friend she didn't quite recognize. Grant made her breakfast the next morning. Eggs, fruit, toast with a hint of almond butter. She hadn't tasted real food in months. She wanted to believe this was real. He waited another week before making the offer. They were sitting on the balcony. The city stretched like a machine below them. Letitia was barefoot, legs curled beneath her, staring at the sky. "I know this sounds crazy," Grant began. "But have you ever thought about getting married?" She laughed short, sharp. "To who?" He looked at her. "Serious." "To me." She blinked. "You drunk?" "I've never been more sober. You're special. You've survived so much. I want to give you something real." Letitia searched his face for a trace of the joke. A hint of the bet she didn't know existed. But his eyes were steady. His voice didn't crack. The city noise blurred beneath them. "Why?" she asked softly. "Because people like you deserve to be seen. For one." Those words, deserve to be seen. They struck a place inside her she'd buried under years of indifference. She didn't answer immediately. She stood, walked inside, stared at herself in that hallway mirror. The reflection didn't smile. But it didn't flinch either. She came back to the balcony. "I don't have anything to offer you. I don't need anything." "Then why me?" "Because you remind me what's real." It wasn't the words. It was the silence between them. The possibility of something changing. She said yes, not because she was desperate, but because for the first time in years, she believed someone might actually see her. The next morning, the news hit the digital world like thunder. Billionaire proposes to formerly homeless woman. Videos, headlines, hashtags, and Remington romance trended in 6 cities. Letitia didn't know about the stream. She didn't see the comments. Not yet. She didn't read the captions calling her a project, a publicity stunt, a rescue mission. She didn't see the edited footage that cropped her silence into serenity. She simply sat in the guest room, reading her chalk poems from a journal Grant had given her, unaware that her miracle had already been packaged for consumption. Outside the penthouse, the world watched. Inside, Grant planned the next step. Letitia stood near the window that night, her forehead against the glass. She whispered something under her breath, a line from an old poem she hadn't finished. "If light is love, let it not come with camera." But the light was already coming, and it wasn't here to love her. Smile. Just like that. Yes. Yes, keep your chin lifted. One of them chirped while snapping a photo on her phone, already uploading it with the tag "From Streets to Silk." Letitia didn't understand where the pictures went, but every time she blinked, another stranger was in her space. Another bouquet arrived from a brand she'd never heard of. Another bottle of champagne popped in a room where she'd rather have had silence. In less than 3 days, a narrative had taken shape. Grant Remington, tech mogul, modern saint, marrying the woman no one else saw. The internet didn't know Letitia's poems or her sleepless nights. They knew her angles. They knew her before and after shots. They debated if the transformation was believable, as if she'd been edited by software, not years of loneliness and new clothes. Letitia tried to keep up. She really did. She attended every party. Grant arranged, one on a rooftop with drones spraying rose petals, one in a candlelit warehouse full of fake ivy and real influencers, one at a vintage theater turned gallery, where pictures of her were blown up to mural size, showing her face mid-laugh, mid-blink, mid-broken. She wasn't the subject, she was the canvas. At one of these events, a man she didn't know leaned in too close, holding a tumbler of bourbon. "You clean up nice," he slurred. "Didn't think someone like you could pull this off." Grant's a visionary. Letitia swallowed hard. "I'm not something he created." The man laughed. "Sure you are, sweetheart. You're the comeback story we never saw coming." She walked away before her stomach turned. But the word stuck. Comeback story. She hadn't gone anywhere. She'd just been ignored. The next morning, she told Grant she needed space. Not to leave. Just to breathe. All this, she gestured around the penthouse. The racks of gowns. The boxes of sponsored jewelry. The stacks of interview requests. "It's not me." Grant cupped her face. His expression soft. "You're overwhelmed. I get it. But this is love, baby. You deserve to be shown off. The world needs to see who you really are." She wanted to believe that. He said it with such calm certainty, like a script written for someone too tired to argue. She nodded, but her chest tightened every time another stranger called her brave for accepting a ring. Somewhere in that same hour, across thousands of screens, people were watching Letitia's latest fitting. The footage had been edited into a glossy montage. Slow motion shots of her stepping out in heels, twirling in sequined gowns, laughing with champagne. They called it From Concrete to Couture. It was framed as a miracle, but not hers. It was Grant's masterpiece. Letitia had no idea the apartment had hidden cameras. Not security, production. Every word she spoke in private. Every moment of silence. Every time she stared too long at the mirror trying to remember who she was. It was all content. The team behind the lens called it authenticity. One afternoon, Letitia sat on the apartment balcony, barefoot watching the city through smudged glass. She scribbled a few lines on a hotel notepad. The words were brittle, the rhyme uneven. She hadn't written anything real in weeks. Her mind felt like static. She tore the page out and tried again. That night, Grant's assistant, Savannah, a woman with teeth too white to be trusted, walked in holding a contract. "Just a formality," she said cheerfully. "Pre-wedding brand agreements. Standard stuff. These brands want to feature you in a bridal capsule. You'll get final say on styling." Letitia skimmed the first paragraph. It mentioned ownership of likeness, perpetuity, social presence, platform integration. "What is all this?" she asked. Savannah laughed. "Legalese. Don't worry, we're just protecting you. And us, of course." Letitia hesitated. She wasn't stupid. She'd read enough contracts in her life to know when her name was being leased out like furniture. "Can I get a lawyer to look at this?" Savannah blinked, then smiled too tightly. "Of course, but it might delay the launch."
The what?
Savannah coughed. "Recovering. I mean the pre-wedding live stream. You know, the rollout." Letitia didn't answer. She took the contract into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. Her reflection stared back at her, painted in foundation and fear. She didn't recognize her own eyes. There was something trembling underneath, an instinct, a knowing. Something was deeply wrong, but every time she reached for it, Grant's voice echoed over it, smoothing it down. This is love, baby." That weekend, Grant took her to a vineyard 2 hours outside the city. A reset, he called it. They arrived by helicopter. The air was cleaner, the silence vast. Letitia felt herself unclench for the first time in days. There were no cameras, at least none she could see. Just them, a table, 2 glasses of wine, and sunflowers swaying in the distance. She asked him gently, "Why me?" Grant smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because no one saw you and I did." She nodded, but her fingers tightened around the stem of the wine glass. "But why put it all online? Why does everything we do have to be public?" He leaned forward. "Because people need to see something good for once. A miracle. Us. You inspire them." Letitia looked away. "It doesn't feel like it's about me." Grant's smile faltered for the first time. He reached across the table, took her hand. "Do you love me?" "I think I'm still figuring out what love looks like," she said softly. "That's fair," he said. But his grip didn't soften. That night, when she returned to the city, she found that an entire video series had launched. Titled Becoming Letitia, it featured moments she didn't remember consenting to. Her looking at dresses, reacting to Grant's proposal, reading poetry to herself on the balcony. The music was soft. The captions called her brave. The comment section was a battlefield. Strangers called her everything from goddess to gold digger to charity case. She stared at the screen, her mouth dry. "I never said this could go up." Savannah smiled from the kitchen. "It's all love, baby." Letitia walked to the window and opened it wide, letting in the cold. Her fingers shook. Somewhere far beneath her, someone honked. The city kept moving, but her world had paused. Not for comfort, for clarity. They didn't see her. They saw the idea of her. Paper roses. Plastic smiles. Letitia didn't leave that night. She had nowhere to go. But she stopped speaking in interviews. She stopped smiling in photos. She wrote nothing. The cameras didn't stop, but they captured something different now. A stillness. A woman turning into stone while the world celebrated her statue. And far across the country, in a sunlit home in Orlando, Lucille O'Neill scrolled past one of the videos. She paused, watched, rewound. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't see a miracle. She saw a setup. "Shaquille," she called again. This time, louder. "Get in here. This girl, she ain't all right." The morning was ordinary in Orlando. Birds outside the window, Lucille O'Neill's slippers padding across cool tile, and the comforting scent of percolating coffee. Shaquille O'Neal sat at the dining table, thick fingers wrapped around a custom mug that read, "Big Shaq, Bigger Heart." He scrolled through sports headlines with half interest, resting in the kind of peace he'd worked hard to build, one not bought with fame, but earned through humility. Then his mother walked in. She wasn't smiling. She carried her iPad with both hands like it was holding something too heavy to trust. "You need to see this," she said, voice low. Shaq muted the TV, one look at her face, and he knew this wasn't about basketball or bad press. Lucille tapped play, and a video filled the screen. Bright filters, string music, a digital fairy tale. The headline blared, "Billionaire Marries Former Homeless Woman. Love or Stunt." The screen shifted to Letitia in a blush gown, blinking under lights that didn't love her, surrounded by people who laughed with their eyes closed. Shaq leaned closer, jaw tightening. He saw her smile, uncertain, like it had been stitched in. He heard Grant's voice, syrupy and staged, narrating a journey like she was a contestant on a game show. And then came the moment. The clip of the rooftop party, the comment from a guest, "She's the best bet you've ever made," followed by laughter just a second too long. Lucille paused the video. "That girl don't even know she's the joke," she said. "Look at her eyes. She's not smiling. She's surviving." Shaq didn't answer, not right away. He stared at the frozen frame. Letitia looking off camera, holding a champagne glass like it might break her if she squeezed too hard. Then he stood and left the room without a word. He wasn't angry. He was awake. Shaq didn't go public. He didn't post, tweet, or call TMZ. He picked up the phone and reached out to someone he trusted, Marcus Bent, a documentary filmmaker who once covered unhoused veterans in Atlanta. Marcus knew how to find the stories that didn't want to be seen. "You got anything on this Remington wedding?" Shaq asked. Marcus was quiet for a beat. Then, "You really want to know?" "I wouldn't ask if I didn't." Within 24 hours, Shaq had the files, uncut footage, influencer uploads, screenshots of group chats leaked by a remorseful staffer. But what hit hardest wasn't the wedding prep videos. It was something else. A private portfolio uploaded by a street photographer named Hollis Shaw. Hidden in the archives were dozens of photos of Letitia from before the cameras, hunched over chalk poems, eyes wide with thought, sometimes laughing alone. One photo stood out. Letitia had written something in fading pink chalk. Being unseen is not the same as being nothing. It's what they want you to believe. Shaq stared at it for a long time. The next day he reached out to Hollis Shaw personally. Did she ever know you were taking these? Hollis responded, she told me once, if I write it in public, it's for whoever needs it. I needed it. Still do. Shaq saved the image. The world outside kept spinning. Letitia's wedding was days away. The live stream countdown was plastered across social media. Grant had signed a partnership with a luxury brand to release a wedding fragrance, Concrete Bloom. Influencers rehearsed soundbites. The media called it the most inspiring love story of the decade. But in Shaq's world, the story looked different. He'd seen too many performances in his life, in locker rooms, boardrooms, and studios. He knew the smell of something rotten under gold trim, and this one stank. He reviewed every video. Every time Letitia was interrupted. Every time her voice got quieter. Every time Grant talked over her. It was all there, if you knew how to listen. Shaq didn't see a rescue mission. He saw a trap masquerading as salvation. And he wasn't about to let her walk into that alone. But Shaq wasn't reckless. He didn't charge in, swinging. He moved like a chess player. He started by contacting Lucille again. You still got that contact at WNBC? He asked. Lucille raised a brow. The anchor or the editor? Both. They met 2 days later in a quiet back office. No press, no entourage. Just facts. He showed them everything. The unfiltered footage. The contract Letitia had been offered without legal review. The audio clip of a private conversation Grant had with his groomsmen. Boasting, when this goes viral, I'll have the world eating out of my hand. People eat that redemption suck up. The anchor. A woman named Desiree leaned back. Disgust written across her face. And she doesn't know? Shaq nodded. Not a clue. But she's starting to feel it. You can see it in her silence. They didn't promise an expose. Not yet. But Desiree agreed to keep the story on deck, waiting for the right moment. Shaq knew that moment was coming, and he'd be there. Meanwhile, he dug deeper into Grant. Public files. Past relationships. Former assistants. Shaq didn't need dirt. He needed pattern. The way Grant operated was clear. He didn't fall in love. He curated narratives. He had a history of dating women with hardship stories, flipping their pain into profiles and PR. Nothing illegal. Everything strategic. Grant's strength wasn't his money. It was how he manipulated public sentiment. And that's what made him dangerous. Because people believed what made them feel good. Letitia was never supposed to feel good in this story. Just palatable. 2 days before the wedding, Shaq arrived in New York. Quiet. Unannounced. No cameras. He walked the streets where Letitia had once slept, retracing the archive photos Hollis had shared. He stood on the sidewalk where she wrote her poems. He knelt down, and with a piece of sidewalk chalk, wrote one word. Still. He left it there, untouched. That evening he called Lucille again. She's not gonna make it out of this clean, he said. Lucille, voice calm as always, replied. Then make sure she makes it out with truth. That's cleaner than any veil. Shaq didn't sleep that night. Not from nerves, but from readiness. He knew the arena. This wasn't about volume. This was about timing. And when the world was watching, he'd make sure the truth whispered loud enough to shake the marble halls. The morning air outside the Remington estate was crisp, curated like everything else in Grant's world. Security lined the circular drive, velvet ropes guided in the guests, and drone cameras hovered just above the chapel's rooftop like silent vultures circling. Inside, technicians whispered in earpieces. Makeup artists, powdered brows. A producer in heels barked. We go live in 15. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a celebration, but the energy in the air was colder than the marble underfoot. Letitia sat alone in the bride's suite, wrapped in a cream silk robe she hadn't chosen. Her hair was pinned into a chignon that itched against her scalp. Her hands, resting in her lap, trembled. She couldn't stop hearing echoes from the last few days. The brand deal meetings she hadn't asked for. The endless fittings. The stream of stylists who didn't see her. Only the product they were polishing. She hadn't written in almost a month. The notebook Grant had given her sat unopened in her vanity drawer, buried beneath highlighter palettes and glinting pins. They had dressed her in the illusion of importance, but she felt smaller than ever. Savannah poked her head in with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. You ready, bride? Letitia looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror didn't blink. I guess, she murmured. Moments later she was walking. The aisle was long. Too long. White rose petals scattered down a stretch of glass that reflected her every step, splitting her image beneath her. The guests stood, phones raised. Murmured compliments followed her like ghosts. She's so brave. Can you believe how far she's come? Grant really is a visionary. But no one met her eyes. The orchestra played a slowed-down version of Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Letitia hated it. It sounded like mockery, a triumphant soundtrack to a story she hadn't written. And then she saw him, Shaquille O'Neal, in the back row. No entourage, no announcement, just presence. Still, watching. He didn't smile, he didn't wave, he just nodded once, slowly. Letitia didn't know why, but her chest tightened. She looked away quickly, afraid of what that single look had stirred. Something in her stomach turned. She reached the altar. Grant stood there, immaculate in his white tuxedo, jaw tight with performative emotion. Cameras flanked them on both sides. A golden mic clipped to his lapel glinted in the light. "Hi, beautiful," he whispered. She didn't answer. The officiant welcomed everyone with a grand, over-rehearsed tone, thanking the millions watching from around the globe, and those in the room who witnessed this incredible journey. He launched into a monologue about transformation and the triumph of love over background. Each word felt like glass in Letitia's throat. Grant squeezed her hand as the officiant nodded for the vows. He went first. His voice was syrupy, smooth, almost too polished. He talked about fate, about struggle, about seeing her in the streets, and knowing she was meant for more. He didn't say her name until the end, not once. Then he added a line that wasn't in rehearsal. "You were invisible to the world, but I made them see you." Letitia flinched. There was no love in that line. Only credit. The crowd clapped politely, some with tears. The cameras zoomed in on her face. But her expression didn't shift. She stared forward like a statue, until the best man, Grant's longtime friend and startup partner Weston, leaned in with a smirk and stage whispered just loud enough. "Hope she's better in bed than she looks in bridal." A few snorted behind covered mouths. One woman gasped. But no one stopped him. The officiant gave a nervous laugh, glancing at the producer. The producer just waved him on. Grant didn't reprimand him. He grinned. And the mask shattered. Letitia turned. Not in anger. Not in shock. In clarity. The kind that floods in all at once when a person finally hears the silence between the lies. She looked out across the crowd, faces filled with curated sympathy. Teeth too white, eyes too hollow. Every smile was plastic. Every cheer scripted. This wasn't her wedding. It was her auction. And then her gaze returned to the back row. Shaq stood. Letitia didn't move. Neither did he. "Not yet." The officiant cleared his throat. "And now, Letitia, your vows." She didn't speak. Not right away. She stepped back instead. Just one step. Then another. Grant whispered, "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Her voice, when it finally came, was quiet but carried. "I thought I was saying yes to love," she said, "but I was saying yes to being used." The crowd murmured. The producer waved again, signal to cut the feed. But the cameras stayed live. The stream never paused. Letitia continued. "I was told I'd be seen, but being seen like a painting in a museum, or a rescue pet in a shelter, isn't love. It's a show." She reached up and unclipped her veil. It slid from her hair like the end of a spell. Her bare curls fell over her shoulders. "I remember what I felt when I said yes. I thought it was a miracle. But miracles don't come with contracts and brand deals. They come with truth." Savannah stepped forward, whispering, "Letitia, please, just finish." "Finish what?" She turned sharply. "Finish pretending I'm lucky to be humiliated. Finish performing for people who never asked if I was okay." She turned back to Grant. His jaw had tightened. His hands trembled, not from heartbreak, but from the collapse of a narrative. "You don't love me," she said. "You love what I do for your image. You love the applause, but you don't know a damn thing about who I am." And then Shaq moved. Slow, deliberate steps down the aisle. No suit, no ceremony. Just a man walking toward someone who'd been alone too long. Letitia didn't step toward him, but she didn't move away either. Shaq stopped a few feet short. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The crowd had gone silent. All the glamour had drained from the room like color from a dying flower. The lights, The decorations, the music, it all felt absurd now. Hollow echoes of a performance that no longer held. Letitia turned back to the crowd. "I'm not ashamed of where I came from," she said. "I rode on sidewalks. I lived in corners. But I was always a person. Not a project. Not a prop, a person." She looked at Shaq, then down at her shoes. Then she stepped out of them. Barefoot on marble, she walked past the altar, past the stunned guests, past the cameras still rolling. She passed Shaq, and he fell into step beside her without a word. They didn't run. They walked, straight out the grand doors. And no one dared stop them. Not even Grant. Because what do you do when the center of your spectacle decides they're no longer interested in being seen? You stand in silence, and realize you were never the story. They were. And they just took it back. The silence after Letitia's words lingered like smoke, curling in the air between marble pews and polished egos. It wasn't the silence of awe. It was the silence of a world watching its carefully laid script unravel in real time, line by line, with no edits, no retakes, and no option to mute the truth. And then, from the last row of the wedding hall, Shaquille O'Neal stood. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His presence alone rewrote the temperature in the room. The same man whose name carried decades of global fame now walked without applause, without a spotlight, without spectacle. He was just a man in a simple black jacket, his eyes calm but unflinching. Every guest turned. Every camera angle pivoted. Even Grant froze, not out of fear but confusion. Shaq wasn't part of this world, not this one built on vanity and clicks. He wasn't in the guest list. He wasn't in the narrative. He wasn't supposed to be in the room. But there he was. Shaq moved slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing through the grand wedding hall, louder than the organ that had played Letitia in. As he passed each pew, the guests straightened, not because he demanded authority, but because he carried truth, and truth, when spoken with clarity, becomes the loudest voice in any room. He didn't raise his own. Not once. He stopped halfway down the aisle, close enough to be seen, far enough not to impose. He turned to the crowd, not with judgment, but with gravity. "I wasn't invited here," he began, "but I came anyway." His voice was low, sure, like thunder disguised as reason. "I came because I saw a woman being packaged like a storybook, and no one stopped to ask what it cost her to be written into someone else's ending." He let the silence sit before continuing. "This ain't a fairy tale. This ain't redemption. This ain't love. This is performance. This is a bet. And not the kind you place on a game. The kind you place on a human being. On whether or not you can take someone's truth and turn it into entertainment." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Some gasped. Others glanced at Grant, waiting for him to respond, to refute. But Grant stood still, jaw clenched, eyes darting. He hadn't planned for this. He didn't know how to fight sincerity. Shaq took a step forward. "I know how power works. I've been the one with the camera on me. I've been sold, bought, praised, criticized, made into something bigger than human. And I survived because I never forgot I was human. But you," he swept a look across the guests, the producers, the brand reps seated in the third row. "You forgot. Or worse, you never knew." He turned toward the altar. Letitia hadn't moved. Her bare feet pressed lightly against the cool marble. Her hands were clasped, not in fear but in control. She looked not at Grant, but at Shaq. "I didn't come here to save you," he said to her, his voice gentler now. "You don't need saving. I came to remind you of something this room worked hard to make you forget." He paused. "You were never less." The weight of those 4 words rang louder than any microphone. Shaq stepped forward, then turned slightly so he could address them both. "Letitia and Grant, there's a machine here, one that takes pain and polishes it into profit. That calls abuse grit, and calls manipulation romance. That tells a woman her value only starts when a man gives it to her. But you don't need to be in that machine. Not today. Not anymore." Then his eyes locked with hers. "I'm offering you a choice. Not an exit. Not a handout. Just a door that leads back to who you were before they tried to rewrite you." He extended his hand. The room held its breath. Letitia stood still. Every flashbulb paused. Even the producer, who had been frantically gesturing at the camera crew, finally froze. Letitia looked at Shaq's hand, then at her own. She thought of the sidewalk chalk, the cold nights, the coat Grant had offered, the quiet theft of her identity, the mask she'd worn for cameras that never asked if she was tired, the heels that hurt more than her scars, The voice in her head that had been getting softer and softer, and then she breathed in. She stepped out of her shoes. One foot, then the other. The hall didn't gasp. It exhaled. Because they all knew, somehow, that this was the real ceremony. Not the vows, not the dress, not the drone cameras recording. It was this moment: bare feet, straight spine, no veil. Letitia took 2 steps forward, then another. Shaq didn't smile. He didn't need to. He just nodded once. She stopped in front of him, still not touching his hand, just standing beside him. Equal, not escort. Then she turned.
Not to the audience.
Not to the camera.
To herself. And she walked, past Grant, past the altar, past every brand manager and influencer who had hoped to profit from her resurrection. Shaq walked beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. They moved through the giant oak doors as if they had rehearsed it. But this wasn't a script. This was the moment she rewrote everything. Outside, the sky was pale with evening light. The wind lifted the hem of her gown like a curtain on a final act. Letitia stopped at the edge of the steps. She looked down at her bare feet against the stone. Shaq said nothing. He just stood quietly, letting the air fill the space between them. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't waiting to be told what to do. She already knew. Behind them, no one followed. No one chased. Because what could they say? The illusion had cracked. And truth, once freed, can't be caged. Letitia opened her eyes, raised her chin, and stepped forward, not into the future. Back into her name. The internet didn't wait. It never does. Within 32 minutes of Letitia walking barefoot down the Remington Chapel steps, the live stream had been clipped, reposted, dissected, captioned, and turned into memes. The moment Shaq stood, the moment Letitia stepped out of her shoes, the moment her voice cracked with truth, the hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Barefoot bride, Shaq saves, Remington reckoning. Some posts praised her for bravery, others mocked her poise as performative, but no one could look away. By dawn, opinion pieces filled digital columns. Commentators debated authenticity like it was a measurable metric. Cable segments buzzed with hot takes. Was it a setup? Was she groomed? Was this billionaire romance ever real? Screens split into panels of experts, talking over each other, each hungry for soundbites. Some voices attacked Letitia. They labeled her ungrateful, manipulative, difficult to please. One radio host called her the face of reverse exploitation. Comment sections overflowed with racial microaggressions, wrapped in faux concern. She should have been more appreciative. He gave her everything. Where's the loyalty? But just beneath the noise, another current moved. Black women, activists, artists, scholars posted threads that sliced through the spectacle. They unpacked how Grant's performance mirrored a long history of turning black pain into white redemption stories. They praised Letitia's silence as resistance. They saw her not as a trending topic, but as an echo of every woman told to perform gratitude for scraps of dignity. And then there was the speech. Shaq's words at the wedding, barely amplified by the chapel's acoustics, had been captured raw, shaky handheld phone footage posted by an intern near the back row. It wasn't polished. It didn't need to be. In 4K or 44p, his voice still landed like a steady drumbeat. You were never less. The video climbed fast. Not for drama. For weight. It didn't scream. It didn't perform. It told the truth. Grant Remington's team moved quickly. His first move was silence, then denial, then reframing. A polished statement hit his social feed, just 20 hours after the wedding. Letitia will always have a special place in my heart. I only ever acted out of love and hope. Attached was a still photo of her mid-laugh, cropped and filtered. The damage didn't slow. Endorsement deals paused, then pulled. A fragrance collab vanished. A speaking event at Columbia was postponed indefinitely. Shareholders called emergency meetings. His PR firm distanced itself in vague, lowercase letters. On Reddit, a thread compiled anonymous stories from former assistants and stylists. Patterns emerged: manipulation, micromanagement, demeaning remarks masked as jokes, nothing illegal, everything telling. For once, Grant didn't have the last word. And for once, he was forced to sit in the silence he usually paid to avoid. Letitia, meanwhile, disappeared from the public eye. No interviews, no Instagram posts, no book deals. Her last recorded movement was through the tall iron gates of an old brownstone in Harlem. Shaq at her side. After that, nothing. Speculation flooded the void. Some claimed she fled the country. Others insisted she was in a retreat center, healing. A few tabloids circulated old photos, digging through her past like it owed them a headline. Letitia said nothing. She didn't need to. She was somewhere quiet. Somewhere with shade. Somewhere with Lucille. On a gray afternoon a week after the media storm, Lucille O'Neill sat beside Letitia on a weathered park bench in Morningside Park. The breeze smelled faintly of rain. Children played in the distance. No cameras. No microphones. Just two women and the sound of their own breath. Letitia wore a navy sweatshirt and old jeans. Her curls were looser now, her face free of makeup. Her feet rested flat on the ground. There again. This time by choice. She tapped a pencil against a small notebook. The tip smudged but steady. Lucille didn't ask questions. She just sat. After a while Letitia spoke. Her voice wasn't broken, just worn, like it had finally found its natural register. I thought I was healed. Thought I was past needing to be chosen to feel whole. But when he said I deserved to be seen, she trailed off. Lucille nodded slowly. Baby, the world trains us to ache for visibility. But being seen by fools ain't the same as being known. Letitia looked down. I almost believed him. You wanted to believe him, Lucille corrected gently. That's different. Letitia turned her face to the sky. The sun broke through clouds in fractured beams. I'm tired, she said. Lucille smiled, soft but certain. Good. That means you've stopped running. They sat in silence again. The kind of silence that isn't empty but earned. Lucille reached into her bag, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it over. Inside was a printed photo. Letitia, in mid-laugh, chalk in hand, crouched on a sidewalk. Her joy wasn't posed. Her hands were dirty. Her clothes wrinkled, but her eyes sharp, alive, were unmistakable. He didn't find you, Lucille said, nodding at the image. He found that, and tried to call it his own. Letitia's fingers traced the edges. Lucille leaned back. You ain't broken, baby. You're just unbent. Letitia looked at her, blinked slow, and smiled. Not wide. Not for anyone else. But full. Later that night, Letitia sat on the edge of her bed in a room with no chandeliers, no lights on dimmers, no scent of roses or champagne. Just a desk, a cracked window, and her journal. She flipped to the first blank page, picked up a pen, and wrote, Today I wore silence like armor. And it fit. She underlined it once. Not to emphasize. To remember. Her name wasn't a trend. Her story wasn't content. And she wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. The first print run of Sidewalk Psalms sold out in 3 days. It wasn't expected. No big publisher. No polished press tour. The poems weren't marketed to fit on mugs or calendars. There were no pastel covers or influencer bundles. Just a black and white jacket, her name in plain font, and a single line on the back. They didn't want to hear me then, so I wrote loud enough for the street to echo. Inside, each poem was paired with a photo, unedited shots taken by Hollis Shaw, the same street photographer who once quietly documented Letitia beneath overpasses and alley walls. Her words ran beside images of cracked sidewalks, rain-soaked chalk, discarded coffee cups, and closed eyes. But what people connected to most wasn't the aesthetic. It was the voice behind every stanza, firm, wounded, never begging. The voice of someone who had been held down by silence long enough to learn its texture, then choose words like stones to build her way back up. The second edition included a foreword by Lucille O'Neill. Letitia never asked for it. Lucille mailed it in secret. It read, in part, This girl walked away from a machine that tried to name her. She didn't ask for fame. She just asked for air. And when the world tried to twist her story, she wrote her own. I've never been prouder to watch a woman stand up without needing anyone to hold her steady. Letitia didn't do interviews often. When she did, she insisted on no makeup, no wardrobe styling, no framing lights. She sat on folding chairs. She refused talking points. She never mentioned Grant's name. Not once. Not out of fear. Out of discipline. His story didn't belong to her anymore. It never really had. She gave her first public reading at a community center in Newark, just 5 blocks from the school where she used to teach. The room wasn't fancy. Folding chairs. Fluorescent lights. No stage. Just a mic stand and a chalkboard behind her. The audience was made of women. Mothers, grandmothers, girls too young to have already known hunger, but somehow still familiar with it. Letitia stood at the front of the room in jeans and a loose tee, no heels, her curls unpressed. She opened Sidewalk Psalms to a page marked not with a ribbon, but a torn receipt from a laundromat. She didn't clear her throat or introduce herself. She just read. They called me dirty, so I became earth. They called me cracked, so I became mosaic. They called me used, so I wrote something that couldn't be recycled. The room didn't applaud right away. It sat with the words. Then someone stood. Another followed. The claps came soft, then full. Not performance. Affirmation. After the reading, a girl maybe 15, maybe younger came up and whispered, "My mom says you taught me something no one else in my life ever did." Letitia didn't ask what. She just nodded, eyes wet, and hugged her. She began speaking at women's shelters after that. Quiet rooms where chairs were always warm from someone else's worry. She never read from the book there. She brought a chalkboard and let the women write instead. One word each. Any word they wanted. Then she'd build a poem from it in front of them. It was never perfect. That wasn't the point. It was theirs. One evening, as she was packing up, she noticed a woman standing off to the side. Young, thin as a shadow, hands clenched. "I used to write," the woman said. "Then I started apologizing too much." Letitia didn't respond. She reached into her tote and handed her a stick of sidewalk chalk. "No more apologies," she said. "Start with this." The woman stared at it like it was a key. Shaq came to her second bookstore event unannounced. Sat in the third row. No camera crews. He wore a hoodie and kept his head low. He didn't come to be seen. He came to witness. Letitia spotted him halfway through the reading. She paused, allowed herself a single smile, then kept going. Afterward, when everyone else lined up for signatures, he stayed seated. When the room cleared, he approached slowly. "You said it all," he said. She shook her head. "Not yet." He grinned. "Then I'll keep listening." They didn't talk much that night. They never did. There was a calm between them now that didn't require words. Gratitude without debt, respect without ownership. Grant Remington's name faded from headlines the way wet ink bleeds, until unreadable. One by one, his startups folded or were acquired, and quietly absorbed. His media footprint shrank. His podcast disappeared. His Instagram went dark. His publicist quit, and when he did finally resurface once, briefly, in a photo outside a Miami cafe, commentators didn't even mention his name. The caption read simply, "Disgraced tech mogul, appears in public." No one cared to finish his story. Even Letitia. Especially Letitia. Months later, Letitia walked past a bookstore window on 25th Street and paused. Sidewalk Psalms was there, faced out, placed beside Baldwin and Gwendolyn Brooks. The sight made her stomach twist, not from pride, but from responsibility. She stepped inside, bought a copy herself, and walked it over to the front desk. "Can I sign this one?" she asked. The clerk blinked. You're Letitia Ward." She nodded. Just felt right to leave something behind. She opened the cover, wrote a single line. "To the girl who's waiting to be seen. You already are." Letitia. Later that evening, she stood barefoot in the same alley where her poems once coated concrete. The city had washed most of them away, but faint lines still lived beneath the dirt. She knelt, pulled a fresh piece of chalk from her pocket, and began again. Not to prove anything. Not to perform. Just to feel the ground beneath her voice. Just to write like she used to. Like no one was watching. The sidewalk on 14th Street hadn't changed much. The cracks were deeper, the storefronts newer, but the bones of the street, the weathered bricks, the scuffed curbs, the way the wind curved around the corners, remained the same. It was the kind of place the city walked past but rarely into. It had never been glamorous, never important on maps, but it held memory like few places could. Letitia Ward stood beneath the chipped awning of what used to be McElroy's bookshop, now a coffee bar with exposed pipes and indie playlists. She wore a faded denim jacket with chalk dust on the sleeves and a pair of boots that looked like they'd walked too far to be decorative. Her curls were unbothered by definition, catching the breeze in soft spirals. Her fingers were white at the tips, a telltale sign of someone who still trusted sidewalk as a canvas. The sun was beginning to drop, washing the street in the golden quiet of late afternoon. Around her, children gathered, 4, maybe 5 of them, sitting cross-legged in a half circle. One girl held her own chalk piece like a baton. A boy had a notebook, half full of scribbles and sideways lines. They weren't waiting for spectacle. They were waiting for something true. Letitia knelt, pressed a fresh piece of chalk against the pavement, and began to write. They told me I was ugly, but never looked long enough to know what beauty meant to me. So I became a poem they'd never learned to read. The kids leaned forward. A girl clapped softly, not knowing why, only that it felt right. Another asked, "Did you make that up right now?" Letitia smiled. "Kind of. Some of it's old, but it still fits." Behind them, a few passers-by slowed, recognizing her. Some pulled out their phones, hesitated, then thought better of it. The scene didn't ask to be posted. It asked to be felt. Letitia rose slowly and dusted her hands off. "You don't need a stage to be heard," she told the kids. "You just need to tell the truth out loud." A boy, the smallest of the group, squinted up at her. "Were you really on TV?" "I was on a lot of things," she said gently, "but I wasn't always me in them." They didn't understand, not fully, but the message stuck somewhere, even if unnamed. Across the street, someone watched, tall, still, a figure that didn't intrude, didn't wave, didn't step closer. Shaquille O'Neal leaned against the edge of a delivery van, arms folded, a half-smile resting behind his stillness. He wore a gray hoodie and old basketball sneakers. No entourage, no camera. He just watched. Letitia saw him. She didn't call out. She nodded, once, and that was enough. This wasn't a reunion. It was acknowledgement. A man who once stood so she wouldn't fall. And a woman who had risen not because someone lifted her, but because someone reminded her she could. Letitia didn't return to 14th Street out of nostalgia. She came because it was hers. Because she had once believed being seen was enough. And now, she knew better. She'd spent the last 6 months visiting cities without warning, leaving poems in chalk on forgotten sidewalks, in front of courthouses, under train bridges, on shelter steps. No announcement, no signing, just a poem, a signature, and a piece of herself given without ceremony. People started searching for them. Fans created online maps to find them. Some were faded by rain before they were found. Letitia didn't mind. She said the poems weren't for forever. They were for right then. Letitia never talked about Grant. Never wrote about him either. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting her voice. He had already taken enough space. Her story had moved on. Her legacy had nothing to do with his fall. Still, the world kept talking. The press tried to bait her with subtle hooks. A journalist once asked, "Do you think what happened to you was exploitation?" Letitia had looked at her calmly. "It was extraction," she said. "They dug into me to decorate themselves, but they didn't get what they came for. Because the real parts of me can't be televised." It became the opening quote of her second book, Untelevised. Letitia walked toward the bench at the end of the block. The same one where she had once curled up in winter with 2 coats and the sound of her own hunger. Now, it was just a bench, a quiet place to sit. She sat. A familiar creak. A pigeon fluttered past. The wind pressed cool air through her curls. Shaq crossed the street slowly. Sat beside her without a word. They didn't speak for a while. Didn't need to. Finally, Letitia said, "I keep thinking people expect me to be angrier." Shaq chuckled. "Low. What do you expect yourself to be?" She shrugged. "Not a hero. Not a victim. Just real." "You are," he said. She turned to him. "Why didn't you try to protect me sooner?" His eyes didn't flinch. "Because I knew you were going to teach them more by standing than by being saved." Letitia nodded, and she leaned back, looked at the open sky. Lucille's words drifted through her mind. "You ain't broken, baby. You're just unbent." There was a kind of full-circle grace in that. Not perfection, not justice in the way headlines liked to frame it. Just balance. As dusk began to lean over the city, Letitia picked up one last piece of chalk and returned to the sidewalk. The kids had gone. The street was quieter now. She knelt and wrote, "They said I was nothing, until I made noise. Then they called me too loud, too proud, too much. But I was just enough." She stood, blew the chalk dust off her palms. Shaq read it, smiled. They walked away side by side. No cameras, no applause. And as they disappeared down the street, a voice, low, familiar, maternal, floated across the scene like narration etched into time. "Lucille, They thought ugliness lived in her face. But truth is, it lived in their hearts. And the man they called Big Shaq, he saw her before anyone else did. Not with pity, with respect. The screen fades, not to black, but to gray. Like sidewalk dust. Like chalk after rain. Like a story not ending, but resting. If this story made you pause, don't forget who gets silenced when no one listens. Look past the filters. Question the spotlight. Protect the unseen. Not every rescue wears a cape. Sometimes it just stands up and tells the truth. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not look away.